Well, as we head into hour two, right before the Memorial Day weekend, I knew kind of all week I wanted to have this guest in studio with us, and I'm glad he could work it out on his schedule. It is a delight to welcome back in studio Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, a physician in town, head of the American and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, candidate for Congress running in Congressional District CD4 to take out and replace Greg Stanton, which would be a trade up like no other. You can follow him on Twitter X, or what we call Twix, at Dr. Z for AZ, DRZ for AZ. You can go to his website, which is simply Z for AZ, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. It's just dawning on me, Dr. Jasser, the last time you were probably in studio, you were probably on this side of the desk because you have occasionally filled in as a guest host for me. And, of course, many people who listen to this show will remember how you would come in on Fridays during 2020 and early 2021 to kind of talk us through COVID and the news on COVID. So welcome back to the studio, sir.
It's just fantastic to be here, Seth. Thanks for having me back.
There's so much about you that I want people to know, and I could spend so much time doing. I'll tell a story you don't know. This is the kind of effect. You know, you do good things in this world like yourself, and you just never know. I did not know your dad, who was also a physician, but you knew my dad. You treated him as his physician. And when he passed, my mom and I and my sisters were sitting around working out the funeral arrangements and stuff, and we were figuring out how many chairs we needed and all that sort of thing, and who would be coming. And Mom said, and don't forget Dr. Jasser. And I said, Dr. Jasser is Dad's doctor. He's not going to be at the funeral. He's a busy man with a busy practice. She said, Zuhdi will be there. I said, there's no way Zuhdi's going to be there. How did she know? My mom was smart. You were there. That's the kind of man you are. You just show up. You're always there, Dr. Jasser.
Well, thank you. That's that's why I went into primary care, and I've loved taking care of families and our communities because it is, a special. It's beyond an honor to be able to walk with people from not only the best times of life, but the toughest and medical afflictions and whatever diagnoses we might have to deal with. Remind us of what it is to be human, and as we come here to Memorial Day, remember those that gave the ultimate sacrifice, and it's just been an honor to take care of so many families.
You served in the Navy. I want to talk to you about Memorial Day. I want to talk to you about, as you've been treating human bodies your whole professional career as a physician, and now you're trying to go and help work on our body politic and save it by adding your voice and work to representation in the House of Representatives. My old boss, Bill Bennett, wrote a lot of books. My favorite one is The Book of Man. He actually profiles you in it, and you're profiled in Dr. Bennett's Book of Man. And what Dr. Bennett writes of you, he says, Dr. Jasser is a man of political courage and conviction. I wish there were more men like him. High but deserved praise. Let's, before we get into the daily politics of things and why you're running for office and what you intend to do once you are in office, let's talk a little bit about that naval service and the meaning of Memorial Day to you, Dr. Jasser.
Yeah, so, having been a head of medical department on the USS El Paso, Operation Restore Hope, and served there for almost a year, and then Clinton decreased our ships by half, and also as a naval medical internal medicine specialist at Bethesda Naval, and then at Congress, you got to meet people from all walks, both retired and active duty. And you realize, and after I left actually the Navy and came to Phoenix in 99, there was a lot of transformation that happened at Walter Reed as it merged in. There was just we really weren't taking good care of our vets and our active duty at Walter Reed. The rehab hospital needed to be, and many of us were part of that initial process. And you just remember a country that is not only understands its Constitution, its freedoms, and the rights that we have, but forgets the fact that we would lose those freedoms had it not been for our military that fights the fights over there before they come over here, whether it's post 9/11, whether it's in 93 when I was in Somalia, or all the other conflicts we have. There's so many and that's why I would ask everyone, go to the Veterans Cemetery, go to our to remember the folks that died so that we wouldn't have to sacrifice. And they gave the ultimate sacrifice. And there are those that sacrificed time away from family. I can tell you right now, as our troops shrink, our servicemen and women, when I was in, used to serve 6 to 9 months abroad, away from home every 24 months. Now it's up to 14 months away from families. And the stresses on our active duty, on our vets, on our families and the millions that serve. And we forget that we have an all-volunteer force.
That's right.
And, there's a reason we're the best, most moral fighting force on the planet. And I can tell you, as a son of immigrants, they left Syria because the most corrupt institution in Syria is the military. And my parents, my father especially, urged me to join the U.S. Navy because he said it was the most moral fighting force in the world, and it reminds us that it serves at the behest of the civilian government. It doesn't. There's no deep state. There's not supposed to be a deep state in the United States, and we take orders from the commander in chief, civilian elected, and not. The head of the military doesn't make decisions on when we go to war or how often, et cetera. And this is what's unique to America and why we're free and why Memorial Day, we should not forget that our freedoms are protected by an armed forces that doesn't ask questions about which wars we fight. They simply take the orders from the civilian elected government.
You know, that's such an interesting phrase, an important phrase, a moral fighting force that we as America represent and portray in the way that we fight, not only when we go to war, but how we go to war. I think you can say that about a few other countries. There's this interesting kind of dichotomy in the American mind. I was worried after 9/11. I was in D.C. I was worried after 9/11 that this country is so unused to war. We hadn't really been in a massive one, the Gulf War, I suppose, but nothing like Vietnam in a very long time, and certainly nothing like World War II in a very long time, that I was worried that our culture had so softened and our youth had so softened in such a sense that the culture would not allow us or our allies to fight the kind of wars we needed to fight, wars of obligation, to have the kind of victories we need to have. And we saw some of this in our post-9/11 efforts, but I think we're seeing a little bit of it now, maybe a lot of it now is the better way to put it, with regard to the war Israel is right now engaged in. People don't remember wars are awful. They are terrible things. There are ways to fight them, but the way that Israel is fighting and the way that we are fighting should not be generating chance of genocide any more than they should be generating chance of death to America here in America. Yes?
100%. And, this is one of the things in the work that I've done within immigrant communities is that there are bandwidths that are soaked up by foreign media, Al Jazeera, Press TV, Russian TV, that will brainwash many of our youth that are not watching Fox, Newsmax, CNN, et cetera, and they're being given doses of anti-American venom, anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, and I keep telling them, as I've told them in the mosques, as I've told them at ASU multiple times, we have a Muslim Liberty Project that we ran through our American Islamic Forum for Democracy to remind youth, immigrant youth, not just Muslims, but all youth, that we are Americans that happen to be Muslim, and not Muslims that demand to be American or whatever hyphenation it is. And that remembrance, I can tell you as a Navy doc, I keep telling them, listen, you think that our troops are committing war crimes and they use Abu Ghraib as some type of template when in fact it was an aberration.
Right.
And I remind them,
they think it's the default.
It's the rule.
Right.
Rather than the fact that we know in society there's a certain rate of criminality, and in the military I believe it's much less than regular society, but it exists. So there was some criminality, but the bottom line is I never saw that in 11 years of service. 11 years of service, I served on a ship where my supply officer was Mormon, my XO was Protestant, my CO was Catholic, my deck officer was Jewish. We had the sort of the quilt of global diversity, but we all would die for each other because we had unit cohesion, and we wanted to keep America safe and keep our troops safe. And They were the most moral human beings, the most professional institution I was ever a part of, which was the operational U.S. Navy and operational armed forces. And I can tell you, at the U.S. Capitol, I responded to an act of terror on July 24, 1998. 4 of my corpsmen and myself ran within 20 yards to Tom DeLay's office after the shooting happened. The Capitol police officers tackled us and said, wait, the shooter's still going out. And I have so many anecdotes of things that I've seen. As a doctor, I don't want to see a single soul hurt. Right. But as an American, if somebody declares war on us, like they did on Israel, like they did on us on 9/11, the moral just thing to do is to respond with force and to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Be right back. Welcome back to the Seth Leibsohn Show. Delighted to have Dr. Zuhdi Jasser in studio with me. Zuhdi is Z-U-H-D-I, Jasser, J-A-S-S-E-R. He is a candidate for Congress running to take out Greg Stanton in Congressional District 4. Go to his website, z4az.com, if you want to learn more about him or to help out his campaign, z4az.com. We were just talking a little bit about your experience in the Navy, Dr. Jasser, and with Memorial Day in our minds. I wanted to pick up on something, a thread on something you said about the different people who were on your naval ships and the different religions, and how yet you were all willing to die for each other because you were Americans. That's what you had in common. You weren't hyphenated Americans. You were Americans first. And I wonder if you might say something about that kind of division that's fallen apart, the divisions that have had America kind of so fractured over ethnicities, over religious claims. I mean, one of the reasons I'm so excited about you going to Congress is so that you can take on the Rashida Tlaibs and the Ilhan Omars in a way that others can't. Either they're not able to because they're not intellectually prepared for it, or because they feel a little bit like they don't have the right to, or they're a little worried about talking about things that intrude into areas of theology or ethnicity. But I do think people like Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and many in the Progressive Squad don't think of themselves as Americans first. And that's something we've kind of lost in this effort to be a multicultural society, effort to have diversity, equity, inclusion run rampant through everything from corporations to med schools and education institutions all around. Say something about our fractured state in America based on ethnicity, the kind of thing that has destroyed the societies that you have had to fight in.
Yeah, and I can tell you that
flee from, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised in a small town in Wisconsin, and my parents taught me that they felt American the moment they stepped off the plane and had asked for asylum before they got here and got political asylum as refugees back in the mid-'60s. And they taught me that that was the strength of America, is that it was not related to a racial democracy, which is what Europe is. There are different languages, different races that ultimately came to secular democracy. But America was based on an idea, and that idea could be embraced by anybody that left their other nationalisms across the ocean and came to this one in order to embrace American nationalism. Now, nationalism in history can go awry, but the nationalism that has been the most successful identity nationalism in world history, and to this day is why I'm running, which is to renew America's promise, is that ultimately that promise is one that we can come together, that 80% in the middle. We're not going to agree on 100%. But as Reagan said, that 80% of and as a primary care doc every day, I negotiate with my patients the 80% things that we're going to address. Mm-hmm. 20% we don't agree that whether the med's right or the referral's right. It's just not on their priority list. 80% of the time I'm able to prioritize their problem list. I want to do that with the body politic. And ultimately, you also want people going to Congress that have not only been vetted, but have been able to rise above some of the noise.
Yeah.
And I've been able to, as a result of some street cred I've earned fighting radical Islam in mosques across the country on national media.
Some street cred. Yeah. You've had death threats.
Exactly. My family's information has been posted on Al-Qaeda sites in Syria with local counterterrorism, joint counterterrorism forces having to make sure that we weren't being attacked in the valley here. So at the end of the day, that street cred has allowed me some deference so that I'm able to work with folks from both within our party that might disagree if I walk out of the room, but when I'm talking to them, we find areas of commonality because I have that street cred, and also across with coalitions. We built coalitions. One coalition is called the Clarity Coalition, which is Champions for Liberty Against the Reality of Islamist Tyranny, and it's sort of the 21st century version of the Committee on the Present Danger. And I've been able to bring together think tanks and Muslim reformers that are across the aisle, and yet we agree on one thing, which is we want to protect America, save the West that's currently at risk against radical Islam and that red-green alliance. So all of that is, I think, so important as you look at, as you mentioned, the institutions that are being destroyed, military institutions, governmental institutions, DOJ, university institutions, faith institutions that are being destroyed by an identity politic because it doesn't want to be an adult. And I think I can change that in Washington.
Dr. Jasser is my guest. He's a candidate for Congress running to take out Greg Stanton, Z4AZ.com to help him out. You know, when you started this campaign, Zuhdi, it was an interesting thing. Not a lot of physicians run. I wish more physicians did run. I think they have a keener, or at least an additionally keen insight that we could use more of in Washington. But also your background. I mean, it was astounding to me to watch how many well-known conservatives lined up to endorse you the moment you announced. What was it that got everyone from, I don't know, Rick Santorum to Glenn Beck and other national radio hosts to come to your support and defense? It's quite an amazing group of people who have come to endorse you, sir.
Well, thank you. I think it's been a lifetime of conservatism. It's been consistency in the message where it's been tested, whether it's in Congress or on media or in at rallies. We had the first rally against terrorism in 2004. I was talking to Daniel Pipes, who I've known for some time in Middle East Forum, and he said, it was 20 years to the day in April that he wrote a piece called The First Moderate Muslims March in Phoenix. And we marched at Patriot Square, a rally against terrorism, and it put sort of the hope on the map for American Muslims and for America that 9/11 wasn't going to have to be a war against all Muslims, that ultimately it could be a war against the Islamists. We then began to educate America that terrorism is a tactic. There's an ideology behind it. So that has built from Glenn Beck when he was on CNN to then, through Fox and now with Blaze TV and the podcast I'm doing there with Hugh Hewitt, who I've been interviewed probably 20, 30 times on his program, Bill Bennett with you and Jim Woolsey and Attorney General Mukasey and others. It's really, as in any walk of life, you have to be consistent. And for people to trust you, I've been vetted, right? I mean, not only did I used to have a top secret clearance, I have had my words tested and challenged repeatedly. Yeah. And there's been consistency to where it made sense. That my opinions on things were things that I was ready to stand by for decades.
That vetting is an interesting question. We'll take a commercial break, and then we'll come back on some other policy issues you're running on. But the vetting is an interesting thing because the thing I hear about you from others is, they do a little looking into you if they don't know you already. They read about what you've been up to for the past 20, 30 years. They heard you on an interview here or there. They might have read an op-ed of yours in the Arizona Republic or elsewhere. And they'll say to me, is he as good as he seems? I said, better. That's what this vetting has done. I cannot convey to the audience what it would mean to have someone like you in Congress. People have low opinions of Congress. You alone in Congress would bring up the level and esteem and reputation of Congress itself once we get you there. So we're very much looking forward to doing that. Z4AZ.com is his website. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is my guest. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Islamism in Congress, in Washington, and its marriage to the progressive cause. Dr. Jasser and I will be right back. There's only really one person who can talk about that, and it is he. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Seth Leibsohn Show. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is my guest, candidate for Congress in Congressional District 4 to take out Greg Stanton. Z4AZ.com, his website, to learn more about him, hopefully to help him out with his campaign that I I endorse wholeheartedly. Dr. Jasser, help us understand something in a way that really you're only one of the few qualified people who gets this. One of the other important reasons to put you in Congress. People listen to an Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, and they're obviously very committed to their religion. But it's interesting, they also will call themselves and get the support from the socialist movement in America. I happen to think of them as Marxists, and they probably wouldn't shrink from the defense of Marxism. And it's a weird thing for a lot of people to understand. Can you kind of square this circle, how you can have a religious fundamentalist like Ilhan Omar, let us say, who is also committed to such a theoretically atheistic philosophy or ideology like Marxism? Same for your Rashida Tlaibs. I mean, is it too simplistic to say it's really not about their religion and it's not about Marx, it's about a hatred for America? And the merger of those two kinds of concepts to hate America, is that too simplistic to say?
No, not necessarily, not at all. But I would tell you that if you look at Chinese Communist Party, for example, at the end of the day, the pathology is a collectivist glob of humanity that believes that ideology should be shared by all and that somehow there's no individualism, there's no freedom, there's no individual rights, and the Chinese Communist Party is the only organism that matters, not every individual human. So political Islam is similar. And Islam, as people look at what's happening in the Muslim world, be it in Iran or with Saudi Arabia's Wahhabism or Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, these are movements that in Western history were defeated in the Enlightenment process, were defeated as America was created in a revolution against theocracy, as you had the reformers from Martin Luther on to Kant and so many other liberty thinkers that became the underbelly of the foundations of our documents, our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. So today's, anarcho-Marxist jihadist, which is this amalgam of, if you put them together, it seems like a Martian. It's actually a red-green axis, which is folks that come together with a common enemy, but once that enemy is defeated, which is the West, which is the free world and free markets, they end up fighting each other. So the Chinas of the world, as much as right now they want to work with the Irans and the Saudi Arabias, when they're left to their own devices, every time the Socialist Workers' Party, for example, in Europe, ended up at the end of the day attacking Tariq Ramadan, the grandson of the Muslim Brotherhood, even though they helped him rise in his prominence in Europe. They ended up attacking him because they realized he was a homophobe, he was anti-feminist, and a lot of the principles that the far left claims to own, they ultimately got to loggerheads with, and especially when it comes to some of the unions and things like that. But at the end of the day, people need to realize that this is the new Cold War. Mm-hmm. The new Cold War is those that hate America. Israel is at the tip of that spear, that they hate Israel, which is the little Satan, and the great Satan being America. And I see Israel as the little America in the Middle East. As it succeeds, freedom will succeed in the Middle East. As it fails, and we don't defend it and stand by it, freedom will fail in the Middle East.
And it could fail here. I mean, I don't want to be overly alarmist, but I do think the vigilance that Americans need right now has to be at a much higher level. The volume needs to be turned up on our ability to defend ourselves, not only physically, not only at the border, but intellectually. I want to talk to you when we come back on the other side of the break, if I can, a little bit about what's going on at our campuses and our education system and the border as well. You've been to the border. You've put out a big border plan. People can access it at your website, z4az.com. It got to be, it's kind of fun, got to the attention of Dr. Phil McGraw. You were on his show earlier this week. People can watch that online as well. Your thoughts on education, higher education, and also I want to talk about the terror threat America is exposed to because of our open border. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser will address all of that when we come right back. Welcome back to the Seth Leibsohn Show. Privileged and honored to have candidate for Congress, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, in studio with me. Dr. Jasser's website, Z4AZ, drz.com. Over on Twitter X, what we call Twix around here, Doctor. He is at Dr. Z for AZ, but it's DRZ for AZ. You were on Phil McGraw's show, Dr. Phil's show earlier this week, talking about campus chaos. I believe that was the headline of his episode where he had you on. You know, in the previous segment, you were mentioning all these great philosophers from John Locke and Immanuel Kant. And, you know, this notion that freedom and equality and the foundations of America, they were based on, you know, great Western concepts and intellectualism. And where does one go for intellectual edification or education? One goes theoretically to school and a college university, where I think perhaps intellectualism and support for Western thought and philosophy is at its greatest discount. Can you share a little bit with us what's gone wrong in education, what you think we can do about our colleges and universities?
Yeah, I think ultimately what's gone wrong is follow the money. The largest contributors to universities are many of whom are foreign governments, including Qatar with billions, China with billions, and it's not an investment that they're just throwing away. They're getting something in return for that investment, which is a weakening of the critical thinking aspect of American universities. The DEI programs didn't just come out of whole cloth, out of thin air. You know, there were tens and tens of millions of dollars in each institution put into a indoctrination of students that somehow America was the problem, that they are on stolen land, and they're all the students are representative of the oppressed, and the government is the oppressor, rather than looking at history through a lens of freedom and liberty. And the universities have lost their way. It's really no longer, and you almost see it's the Northeastern Ivy League schools and the higher, more expensive schools that seem to be the problem. And if you look in, whether it's in Texas or a lot of the state schools that seem to be the ones that were singing the national anthem as these encampments where kids didn't even know what they were protesting, were simply about anti-Americanism. So, and I see this in the military academies where you think it'd be the last place you'd see it, where we're supposed to be producing folks that not only understand American history but want to defend it, but actually DEI programs have prevented them from even using language necessary to learn who the enemy is and what we represent.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm very concerned about the next generation.
And it is at the military academies too, isn't it? It's one of the last precincts you would think would be problematic, but you and I have kind of been watching this ever since really the Fort Hood incident for me. That was a wake-up call, and the way that Army Chief of Staff was talking about how still very important diversity is, even more so than force protection, General Casey said. A couple years ago, the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff, Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before Congress saying he reads Marx to better understand America. Really? Really? You're reading Marx to understand America? This is asinine, if you'll forgive me.
It is. And you look, as Rashida Tlaib came to ASU to try to raise money for Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a horrifically radical organization, which pretty much has, as far as I'm concerned, called October 7 a resistance movement, which is material support for terrorism. Yeah. And yet Greg Stanton, this was in our district, and Greg Stanton was nowhere to be found. He sat silent. You could see him on video as they're protesting him. Didn't open his mouth. Right. Didn't stand up and say, well, if you guys really believe in Muslim rights, then tell Hamas to surrender. Mm-hmm. Then tell them to release the hostages. This is a just war. That's all he needed to say. But he's an empty suit and has really no business representing the district because he doesn't represent the values. And this is the reason I'm running, Seth, is you see universities in our district like ASU. You see them across the country. As I talk to families in my practice and across the district, they tell me that they're worried about what their kids are being taught and the fact that they don't have role models to represent what the future is of America. Yes, we can talk about, condemning anti-Semitism, which everybody does and should do. But what are we for? We need to be able to articulate what is the American narrative that is just, that is moral, and that has a history that we should be proud of, not condemn. And this is why I think, as the son of immigrants, as somebody who has been standing up for healthcare rights through a pandemic, standing up against establishments for a generation now, I think it's time to have my ideas and the ideas of so many other voiceless to have a voice in Congress, that it's not just about passing laws, but it's about defending the ones that we have and also being an advocate. I've been an advocate on a number of areas, not just sort of just now deciding to run. And our members of Congress, if they're going to represent, should be advocates where we're marching at the border. Our border plan, as you mentioned, calls for sealing the border, number one. Not voting for anything else first, sealing the border, deporting Biden's illegals, making sure asylum happens outside the country, not after they come in. Stopping to call this recent bill a bipartisan bill is nonsense. It's gaslighting. It's not bipartisan. 2 Republican senators, that was it. I don't even know. It's not bipartisan. So there are many aspects of our 8-point plan that should be part of legislation, and I can bring that to Congress and make Stanton appear and send him to retirement because he clearly was an empty suit.
Just real quickly before we conclude and speak just a little bit more about the campaign in that conclusion, just real quickly, Zuhdi, obviously you let down your border or you take your border for granted. Great terrorism can occur. Israel just learned that 6 months ago. How worried are you about, with all the other problems our open border brings, how worried are you about it inviting terrorism?
So imagine, not only is radicalization happening with kids born here, right? One of our biggest enemy, Awlaki, was born here, and he declared war on our country. Right. So you add on top of that, most of the 9/11 hijackers came in across. We just saw two Jordanians trying to go into Quantico that came across that were illegal. So many crimes we've seen committed, rapes, murders, destruction, drugs brought in. I mean, it is... If there's any type of treason that's been done by a party, it's the treason that's being done by allowing thousands to come in illegally that are destroying the fiber of what we are, consuming our resources illegally, and bringing in, we've had over 160 known terrorists that are on our watch list that came in, let alone the thousands that are brand new that would not be traceable, that are going to end up committing acts of terror, and then we're going to have to pick up the pieces after that happens.
All right, Doctor. What do you need for this campaign? What do you need to win? What's the pitch you would like to make to my audience that wants to put you into the House of Representatives?
Well, listen, I think the best candidates are the ones that are at the right time and the right place with the right platform and the right district. This is the right district. It's been redistricted. It's barely a 1% district for Stanton. If people vote along party lines, they're not going to do that this year, especially with a candidate as weak and missing in action as Stanton has been. My other candidates in the primary, God bless them, they all ran previously. Kelly Cooper lost by 13 points last time. So we need somebody that can beat Stanton, and I can do that. I've made my case. Go to the website and see what our ideas are. They are deep ideas about how to fix the problem of the border, to reinvigorate American economy, to get the quality of life back for our citizens and our families, to reestablish parental rights. And if people agree with that, join our movement, join my campaign. I will not forget about the advocacy. And I've been in business for 25 years, running a small business in an industry that's been beleaguered. We need volunteers. Go to z4az.com. Help us get the word out because we can win this with your help.
Bless you, sir. Godspeed. Welcome back.